His Spirit School, Chapter 9, entitled All at Sea. Oh no, Dream, All at Sea. Tom and James jumped onto their bunks and were instantly asleep. James dreamt he was floating on top of the ocean. He was gently bobbing along, but he didn't feel cold or wet. It felt like he was laying on a translucent trampoline. He could see the multitude of fishes swimming below, and then suddenly a black cat bobbed up with a goldfish in its paw. This was definitely a strange dream. Tiny bubbles emanated from the fish's mouth and then popped to the surface to become words. Tom was rolling about and kicking at the blankets in his bed, the covers jumping up and down. James woke from his uneventful dream. He shook Tom on the shoulder. He was still in a deep, strange sleep. By now, the cat in his dream was showing pointy teeth and biting the heads off the fishes one by one, and smiling as it did so. Sweat was running down Tom's face, and he was moaning loudly. James filled a cup of water and poured it on his head, as he could not stand the noise much longer. Tom woke up coughing and spluttering. It took him a while to realize it wasn't in the sea. Bloody hell, why'd you do that? You're making so much noise, he answered. I had to, he said defensively. I had such a strange dream. I could tell, said James, shaking his head. They were both so restless that they decided to go for a midnight stroll. It was too late to wake the girls, so they set off alone. There was a full moon, and the hooting of an owl set the scene. They tried to be quiet, but their feet were crunching on the leaves, and their breath hung in the air like cobwebs. Well, this is great, said James sulkily. It's cool, said Tom. Let's have a look round. He had a backpack with him with a torch inside, and he decided he would use it. Where are we going to go? James said, trying not to sound too worried. To the headmaster's study, Tom said nonchalantly. Are you crazy? Said James. What if we get caught? We won't, Tom said with confidence. James didn't bother to ask why they were going there, as he didn't want to come across as a wimp. They had a small wall to climb, which wasn't easy in their t-shirts and tracksuit bottoms. Tom went first. He confidently got to the top with little effort. This was exasperated to James. Was there nothing he couldn't do? James grabbed the huge dusty bricks with his fingers and pulled himself up, step by step. It was hard going, and sweat formed on his brow and ran down his back, making his t-shirt stick to him like a second skin. When he got near the top, James grasped his arm and pulled him over. They both dropped onto the soft grass below, making no sound like commandos. This way, said Tom. Luckily, he had researched the school in the library while everyone else was writing poetry. He knew exactly where to go. They approached the headmaster's study. It was set back from the school on an island of grass. Oh shit, they thought. James, we're really in for it now. Don't worry, said Tom. We won't be caught. I've got it all sorted. James sighed. He hoped so as they approached the building. Tom fumbled in his bag and produced a penknife. He waggled left and right in the door and turned the handle. James watched amazed as the door slowly opened and Tom walked in as if he owned the place. James followed sheepishly. Tom turned on the torch and it illuminated the room and shone on a huge writing desk and comfy leather chair and the long row of bookshelves. A strong smell of tobacco filled the room and his nostrils. James wondered what they were looking for but was too afraid to ask. The light shone over works by Monet and then travelled onto a smaller dish with a photo of the grinning, jovial headmaster. He opened the top door and nothing was there. Then the next one and then the next. He got to the bottom drawer. It was full of old newspapers and magazines, of sports cars and scantily clad women. He ruffled them about and found what he was looking for, a photo album, worn and discoloured, but an album nonetheless. He opened it, feeling excited as James looked on. The first few photos were of his childhood and were quite pleasant and innocuous. Then he found what he was looking for. They were photos of the headmaster holding hands with the librarian, and then photos of them kissing. Page after page revealed more, and then the clincher, an image of the cottage with broken windows and an image of her on the floor unconscious. On the table was a glass of half-empty red wine, and seen in the photos another photograph showing a trail of wine like blood dripping onto the floor. He's poisoned her, said James. I knew it, and I'm not surprised, said Tom. I knew he was hiding something. There were a few more photos of the woods looking eerie in the fading light. I bet he's burned her in the woods, proclaimed James excitedly. It wouldn't surprise me, said Tom. He closed the book, as he had seen enough. Again, he shone the light round the room, and the photographs appeared to come alive as the light hit. Once benign faces appeared macabre, making them jump. All of the faces in the photos seemed to be watching them with suspicious eyes. Just as they were about to leave, Tom found a crumpled up note under the chair. It was from the headmaster. I'm sorry, darling, it said. I will have to break off our engagement, as my heart now lies to someone else. And he signed it with an arrogant flourish. That's why, said James. Let's get out of here. What do we do now? Said Tom anxiously. We'll sleep on it, said James firmly. That seemed like a good idea. As they made their way out, it was very dark and owls were hooting in the shadows eerily. They gingerly made their way up and over the wall. James kept imagining the head coming up behind him and grabbing his shoulders. His heart was beating madly, and he couldn't wait to return to the safety of his bed. Tom was whispering about this being the reason why the librarian was so angry, running around and scaring everyone. It was hard not to disagree, as she had been betrayed in the matters of the heart. What shall we tell the girls? Said James. Nothing, Tom replied steelily. Let's keep this between us. Finally, they made it home. Tom climbed into bed, and he could hardly lift the covers enough to climb under. He was that tired. James crawled into his bed like a dying man. Tom had an uncomfortable sleep. He dreamt that the windows were swinging open. He went to close them, but his feet were made of lead and he could hardly walk. Snow was blowing into the room, making it arctic cold. He rose to close the windows and he could see the mist swirling outside. He could hear footsteps in the snow getting closer and closer. He looked up and she was there, with eyes blood red and her face white and angry looking. She opened her mouth slowly, and ruby red blood slipped out, turning the snow crimson. She moved towards him with outstretched hands, her bones showing through her translucent skin. He tried closing the window, but it melted in his hands. He screamed into the indifferent night, and she laughed hollowly. He awoke and was very relieved to be safe in bed. He went to the window and looked out. Thankfully, there was no snow on the ground. He could see the trees twisting in the night, reaching out as if to claim the moon. He shivered and went back to bed. It was still early. He pulled the covers over him like a child. Thankfully, morning came and flooded the room with a welcoming light. When Tom and James got to the canteen, the girls were patiently sipping on their coffee and waiting for them. Hi, said Lucy brightly. Did you sleep well? No, they both said bitterly. It was a rough night. They said, smiling wearily at each other. Well, I slept great, said Anna. I dreamt of finding a chest full of diamonds. It was so realistic, I wish I'd never woken up. I wonder what it could mean, said Lucy mischievously with a wink. How typical, said Tom. Money won't do you any good here. Well, it felt nice to hold it, said Lucy, and the girls laughed, but the boys did not. Enough of this daydreaming, said James, finishing his coffee. We have a lesson to go to. When they got to the class, the teacher was giving out textbooks. He was a skinny man with one distinguishing feature, a very red face, as bright as a traffic light. It was hard not to feel sorry for him. It didn't seem to be caused by embarrassment, it just happened to be that way. His name was Mr. Bramley, like the apples, which was apt as his face looked like a bright red apple. He had a long Roman nose and a thin mouth, and he looked permanently stressed out. It was rumoured that he had passed over from a massive heart attack, which wasn't surprising, as he looked fit to burst. He handed out the textbooks, but why they were studying geography was anyone's guess, as they were all cocooned in the same place and weren't encouraged to roam far. They were encouraged to research the places they loved or were interested in. Both the girls were looking at Paris and the Eiffel Tower, and all the beautiful galleries and parks they could lose themselves in. Tom and James were looking at New York City and all the dazzling nightlife. Tom loved America and the music and the culture. He loved the movies and sometimes lived his life as if he was in the movies. He always wanted to be like James Bond, driving a fast car and meeting super beautiful women. He wanted a penthouse full of expensive art and leather sofas, and drinking champagne with beautiful women and having expensive fun. Mr. Bramley asked all the pupils about their favourite places and what they liked about them. When it was Tom and James' turn, they went into overdrive about all the things they would love to see and do when they would get there. Everyone listened, and their enthusiasm swept through the whole class. Lucy and Anna listened attentively, not put off by all the bravado and cockiness. When it was over, Mr. Bramley congratulated them, and applause rang round the class. Then it was Lucy and Anna's turn. They went into lovely detail about all the charming and cool things they would do, all the adventures they would have, drinking coffee and wandering around the streets looking up to see the Eiffel Tower. Mr. Bramley was beside himself. Well, he said, you have certainly painted a vivid picture of Paris. You've made me wish I was there, myself, he said, smiling. It made me want to run around the art galleries and drink in all the culture, he added. At break time, they all relaxed and chatted about the lesson. I enjoyed it, said Lucy, but it makes me sad that I'll never get out of here. Me too, said Anna. Tom and James were still buzzing from the lesson. It was exhilarating looking at all the photos of American culture. I need a coffee to help me come back down to earth, said Tom. The girls were busy whispering to one another, probably still dreaming of romantic Paris. James began reminiscing about the night before. Maybe we should tell the girls, he said. They'd be shocked, but I'm sure they'd enjoy helping us. That's true, said Tom, but where do we start and what do we do? The girls asked them what they were talking about, and they went through the whole story. You couldn't hear a pin drop as they listened open mouthed. I can't believe we could do that, said Lucy. How can he get away with it? Implored Anna. They talked about the photos and wondered what could have driven the headmaster to do such a thing. They look so happy together, Lucy said sadly. Yeah, at first, interjected Anna bitterly. Who do we tell this to? Said Anna. I'm not sure, said Tom. We need more evidence. So that's why she's running around like a tortured spirit. She was murdered by her lover when she was probably looking forward to getting married. It was time to get back to the lesson. We'll talk about it later, said Tom. The lesson carried on as before, but it was hard for them to concentrate. All they could think about was solving the mystery of why and how she had been killed and what they were going to do about it. It was hard for them to do anything, as there was no police to know of, and no courts, and no way to dispense justice. It was an odd situation. They didn't want to become victims themselves. Their heads were abuzz with thoughts of confronting Mr. Graves, yet they didn't know if this was a good idea. Finally, the lesson ended, and they piled into the boys' dormitory and tried to formulate a plan to confront Mr. Graves. Anna suggested going back to the cottage to look for clues. But Tom and James were not keen on the idea, and Lucy looked terrified. They considered telling another teacher, but this was quickly vetoed as being too risky because none of them knew if they could be trusted. After all, they were outsiders. Anna confronted the others and demanded that they go back to the cottage that very night. They were startled but reluctantly agreed. Tom and James weren't sure what it would achieve, but they went with it anyway.